Hey everybody, I am joined by my good friends Rob, Shane, and Tim, my former bandmates from Vicious Angel. And today we are going to take a trip down memory lane and discuss a concert that happened on June 10th, 1990 at the Oneonta Theatre in Oneonta, New York. Hey guys, welcome back.
Thanks,
Hey,
Darren. Good to
Darren.
see you.
Good to be here.
Shane pointed out that it's probably been almost 30 years since the four of us have been in the same conversation room.
Yes, I mean, there's been different times that different members of the band have gotten together or had the chance to speak or to live together post Vicious Angel. But this configuration, the four of us, it's been 30 years or close to it since the four of us have had a conversation. So this should be a lot of fun.
Seems like ancient history.
So, Tim, you had a huge part in the logistics and organization of this concert. Prior to the June 10th show at the Oneonta Theatre, we were playing out in Oneonta. We played all the bars, Paradise Lost, the Oasis, the Copper Fox,
All the finest establishments.
all the finest establishments. And then at some point, it occurred to you, we need to up our ante and maybe try a bigger venue. What inspired the idea to contact the Oneonta Theatre?
Probably just the fact that we had heard that it was available to rent the theater out. I'm not really sure who brought the idea to me, but of course, having been, most of you guys were in high school at the time, and I was a couple years older than that. Um, we'll just say a couple years older and leave it at that. But I had always, had dreams, ideas of playing bigger stages, which I had been fortunate enough to be able to do for a little while. I had toured with a band actually out of Florida for a while, so I could just see all the effort that we were putting into this. The amount of practice and woodshedding that we did was just phenomenal for a band, especially a group of guys that age.
Mhm.
And I thought the sound was good, the talent was definitely there, and I could see us on a bigger stage. We certainly had the popularity around town to be able to draw in a crowd, so why not give it a try?
Yeah, I thought it was a great venue choice because we had not only worked the college circuit quite a bit, but we were out playing local high schools and every type of venues. I mean, even like restaurants like the Oasis and other things that we talked about earlier. But this was a central location that was all ages, so we could draw upon the over 21 crowd that would normally come down to the bars to see us, but this would give kids as young as elementary school the opportunity to come in and be able to get almost our high school following and our college following in one place, which pretty much led to us selling this place out, I believe. So it was a great choice, and then aesthetically and sonically, just a very historic theater and a beautiful setting and centrally located for us to kind of pull in the entire fan base and be able to sound and look really good.
You mentioned historic, and I'm sure you guys are aware of this, having being from that area. But the Chestnut Street Theater actually used to be a vaudeville theater back in the day, and the Chestnut Street Theater had an upstairs theater and a downstairs theater to it. But back when it was operating as a vaudeville theater, the upstairs was actually like a mezzanine for people to sit in, and they could look down. They put the floor in between to make it into two theaters, but originally it had been like an upstairs, downstairs, looking at the same stage kind of theater. And what a beautiful stage it was too, by the way. They just don't make stuff like that anymore. So
No, and I think you're right. By the 90s, they were trying to maximize profits and were able to run two films at once. Hence the upstairs maybe for second run films and the main attraction downstairs. And it was the main floor that we ultimately rented.
During the 1980s, I had performed there a couple of times. They would occasionally hold these special events, sort of like young artist showcase type. To call it a talent show is probably the wrong description. But in any case, it was a beautiful theater.
Well, Darren, if you were playing, it was a talent show.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. One thing that stands out, though, is that while growing up in Oneonta, that theater, at least from my vantage point, it was a movie theater. That's where we went to see Star Wars or Raiders of the Lost Ark or all these iconic films. And bands didn't play there. So the June 10th, 1990 gig is significant because really it was the first time, at least that I'm aware of, that a rock group ever performed at that theater. And it was a big event. I mean, for example, Rob, we had drum risers for you.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I remember about that show was that up until that point, the majority of the gigs that we did were like in the downtown Oneonta bars where, it's a college town. They're sort of small basement bars. Oftentimes they're really long and thin, so the band would be kind of at one end, and then the audience would spread out from that. But they were right there. They were right on top of you. But at the theater, we had this huge stage. There was room for you guys to move around. I had my kit up on a riser. We had lights. So from where I was sitting, I could kind of see you down below me a few feet, and then I couldn't even see the first row of the audience. It was just black, and I could hear them. And I don't know if it was just a trick of the acoustics in that place, or we really had a lot of people, but it sounded like we had a lot of people, and it really felt like a big rock show rather than just another bar gig. So it was a really cool experience for a 16, 17-year-old.
And another thing that gig demonstrates is the power of pooling resources. I think that a memory that stands out about that entire show and the planning and organization is that we all collectively pooled our resources. I know Rob and I were selling tickets at our high school. Obviously, Tim, you were very involved with the planning, the logistics, organizing the rental of the PA system. Shane had his promotions happening where he went to high school, and then Peter had his contacts with the college. So we were, approaching this from every different angle to make it as successful as possible.
Peter had a lot of friends. He was, I don't want to talk about him like in past tense. I mean, Peter's a really nice guy. He's just plain hard to dislike and a great front man. I mean, a good singer, had command of the lyrics and understood the music more than just knowing the words to it. But he also, the way that he moved on stage, he was a good looking guy who was in fantastic shape, the kind of thing that the girls are screaming for, and he would really work the whole stage. He had a way of approaching the audience very personally, as if he was actually singing right to the people right there in the front row or the second row or wherever he happened to cast his gaze. And it was really nice. It brought him in and sort of made them part of the show.
Absolutely. And you could certainly, when you watch Peter perform, I think you could pick up on the fact that he was probably influenced by entertainers and frontmen like David Lee Roth from Van Halen or Paul Stanley from Kiss. He had that stage presence that was undeniable.
Yes, and then he was infusing a lot of the new music from that time that was popular, the Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, some of these other bands like Slaughter and stuff with some of the higher register stuff. So, he really brought a lot to the table vocally and visually. And then from his contacts at the college, Peter was a college student. He was in a fraternity. So there were, there was a whole draw from the music industry school that he was in up at the State University in Oneonta, the music industry program, where he was able to, like I said, really utilize all his resources with his fraternity for security and really help the draw as well, which, like I said, we all pooled our resources, and this was just the perfect venue to be able to get anyone of any age into one spot at one time on a Sunday. And have it do very well.
The contacts you mentioned in the context of him being in a fraternity, that was important, possibly even more than we know, because it didn't just bring people to the concert that way. It also, with the bar gigs that we had done previous to that, and whatnot, it really helped to bring people into those shows like at Paradise Lost. And when they could bring that many people in to see us play, to hear us, and decide hopefully that they liked what they heard, well, that's going to bring more people to the concert in the long run too. So really a cascading effect that kind of context has.
And it was a unique time for us to be musicians and to be performing live. I just seem to remember those shows being really packed. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah. Sometimes too packed.
They'd call the fire department.
We certainly had to deal with our share of drunks coming up and grabbing a hold of a mic.
One of the things that also stood out about the June 10th show, I'll just mention this, is that we rented our PA system from another local band called A Beggar's Opera, who would perform with us on occasion, and they were also a very popular local act. The drummer was Jeff Concy, who's gone on to have a very successful career as a studio drummer. And then Alan Levine was the guitarist. So if you look at pictures from the June 10th show, you'll see those guys in the pit at the mixing board running sound for us. It's kind of a trip to see.
Yeah, the venue had a really nice orchestra pit, and which really added to the special nature of making this different than a lot of the other venues that we had, because there was almost this catwalk that went out that Peter was able to work for this particular show. We were able to have security in the pit, sound in the pit, constant contact with the main engineers in terms of tweaking the sound. So it was, like I said, a really great opportunity to actually hear yourself properly with all the right monitors and all the right acoustics versus the normal venues we were playing in at the time.
Rob, what do you remember about the June 10th, 1990 show?
Like I say, I remember kind of just the uniqueness of being in that venue. It was, it actually had a backstage where we kind of hung out beforehand, and the stage to come out, for our entrance. We did kind of structure that whole show like a big rock concert, where we came out and we did a few tunes, and we each took you and I anyway, we took solos. You mentioned it before, Peter really sort of shined as a front man and interacting with the crowd. It really, like I say, for high school kids, most of us, and Peter and Tim were a little bit older, but it really had that sort of rock star, real kind of feel to it, which was significantly different than the other stuff that we'd done, playing in the bars, playing high school dances or shows at, for high school kids, that kind of stuff, which was awesome in its own right at that age as well. And one of the other things too that I think that stands out to me now is just how unique that whole band was. Well, what do I want to say? Not to say anything bad about any other band that I was ever in, but I kind of expected that every band was like that. That was the first band that I was in. It was my first experience with, with five guys just getting together and putting a band together and putting the work into it. And I just kind of figured that was what it was like. Like I sort of maybe took it for granted a little bit. Everybody in that band pulled their own weight and pitched in, and we all moved gear, we all worked on the tunes, we all came to rehearsal prepared, all of that kind of stuff that in the 30 years since of going on and being a professional musician, I have encountered a lot of professional situations that were not anywhere near as professional as three high school kids and two college kids in the late 80s.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
And that was another important point too, is the time that was put into it during an era where it wasn't so easy to have resources at your fingertips to know all the chord changes or the lyrics or tutorials. Most of this stuff had to be done by ear. So there would be times we would spend hours over at Rob's. So I don't know if it was brought up, but Rob's house was the main rehearsal and hub, kind of socially for the band. And then for all of our practices or sectionals, we'll call them, where we would get together 2 or 3 of us at a time to work on different parts. But I remember going in there and, and seeing Peter and Rob or Peter and Tim or different configurations of the band, rewinding and fast forwarding a cassette tape to actually get the lyrics. I mean, a lot of this stuff was not readily available. Occasionally you would have guitar magazines and certain things that would have tablatures for certain songs. But when you're talking about a 3 or 4 set type of thing for the clubs that we had to play, that's 10 songs per set. You're talking 40 or 50 songs that you had to know at your fingertips. And a lot of that had to be done by ear, one note at a time, more or less.
I think it's worth a mention here too, that you talk about the 40 or 50 songs, and yes, we did have them ready for every show that we played. We had to. We played 4-hour shows, which who does that anymore? Do they even still do that, really? I don't know. But whenever I go see bands now, one thing that I see that was conspicuously not there with us is music stands. We didn't have any notes of any kind written out or
iPads
or cue cards to, did you have cheat sheets?
No, but to your point, I agree. I see people with iPads and, where they're able to read the lyrics. It's a step away from karaoke now. Yeah,
it really is. And not to take away from the playing ability of the people that are out there and doing it now. Good God, it's a harsh environment to play in bars anyway, just by the virtue of what people happen to be imbibing at the time. But for us, we're out there playing, this 4-hour show, and we know everything by heart. We could play it with our eyes closed, standing on our heads, basically, and that's really quite an accomplishment.
That's a good point. I forgot about that. It was all from memory, wasn't it?
Every bit of it. And boy, I think we really harassed, let's say Rob, when he forgot a drum fill. We really put the pressure on. There was a lot of peer pressure, just in our own little group, and yet that didn't take away from the rapport that we had with each other. So we were very lucky.
And I think another thing that allows us to reflect upon what we did as teenagers, more so than if we were just strictly a cover band, is the fact that we were interested in writing original music. And, some of that was recorded, some of that is now available on music streaming services. Clips from our shows when we were in high school or beyond, they're on YouTube and what have you. And they've been seen thousands of times. It's funny because they probably have been seen more since the gig than the number of people who were originally there, which always amazes me.
Yeah, we're really lucky that some of the archives were found and have been, touched up. I mean, we're talking, 30-year-old VHS tapes and audio tapes that could have been in any sort of climate and condition. So it's a miracle that it survived to begin with, and then, the work put into it. So, we can at least look back at it and have something to actually listen to and watch in some cases, more than just talk about it, which is really nice.
Just to revisit one other point, Rob, your parents were so amazing and supportive of what we were doing at the time. I mean, they had a PA system set up in your attic. We were always welcome there, morning, noon, and night. I'm sure listening to a bunch of teenagers rehearse hard rock music wasn't always enjoyable, but they tolerated us.
Yeah, my parents, first of all, were always really supportive of me being a drummer, which is kind of amazing, and of the band too, and I think that they saw how seriously we took it and the work that we put into it, and we could have been doing at that age a lot worse things than playing a bunch of hard rock music.
Do you guys happen to remember how much the tickets were selling for the June 10th show?
I do. They were $5 in advance, $6 day of show.
Okay.
I remember working that
Wow.
really well, and we had close to $600 or $700 in walk-up sales the day of. A friend of mine was working in the ticket booth. It seems kind of funny now, but back then that was an enormous amount of money for walk-up ticket sales. So that's that, and we also placed ads in local newspapers that had, and I think that's around too. We might be able to post a clip of that. But it also had our, in addition to the different outlets where the tickets were available, Tim and I actually listed our own personal phone numbers on there, pre-cell phone and everything. And we were pretty popular. So putting our phone number out there, it seems kind of silly in a sense, because of course we weren't real celebrities, but locally we were. And, we had some like stalkers and weird phone calls coming in at different, times of the day and certain things, because we actually made that public. And, we look back at it, we're like, maybe that wasn't such a great idea to put our phone numbers out there. But yes, specifically it's $5 in advance, $6 day of.
Another memory that just occurred to me is that evening, showing up for the gig beforehand, seeing a line around the block. That was something you really didn't see outside of the Oneonta Theatre, unless it was the premiere of, I don't know, some blockbuster movie. But it was really exciting to see that. And we had our name up on the marquee, and it was a sold out live event. It was a pretty exciting time for all of us. And again, I think it was a reflection of everybody's collective effort. It demonstrates that old maxim that teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also important. It's important to note too that like you said earlier, at the time we were probably the first rock band to play there. I know the theater is since closed, but it reopened maybe 10 years ago or so, and it became for a short period a pretty popular venue for smaller level national acts. A lot of, I mean, I think for a time it just became a very popular tour stop for some bands. Maybe 2009, 10, 11, around that. Rob, I know you still live there. So
it's gone through, I'm still in the area, and it's gone through a couple different incarnations and a couple of different owners. And, where Oneonta sits basically equidistant between Albany and Binghamton, and we're about 2 hours-ish south of Syracuse and 3 hours north of the city. So we're pretty much right in the middle of central New York. And so there's a lot of acts that are going through this area. And, again, if you're going to come up from the city, chances are you might go up 87 to Albany and play some shows in Albany. And then one way or the other, to get over to Western New York, you're going to take I-88 that goes right through Oneonta, or take 90 up maybe to Syracuse, but then on the way back down to the city, if you're coming down through the southern tier, you'll take I-88 the other way. So there's a lot of these bands that they're coming through Oneonta one way or the other. So having a place to stop and, play a small gig, it was a reasonably popular spot. I think one of the problems was that just the nature of that building. It's a big building. It was I don't know how many people it seats, maybe 600-700-ish, something like that. I think in both the lower and the upper part, and there's an extensive backstage and basement and some other areas of the building, and it's a big old building, so it's a lot to maintain and to heat and just to keep the lights on. So it's had some success, but it's also had some difficulties as well. And at the moment, it's kind of in another transitional period, and hopefully it lands on its feet. There's a lot of theaters that are similar in the area, in Albany or Ithaca, that are these same type of vintage theaters. Again, it's a cool part of history, part of our history, but just part of the history of the town and, sort of just Americana. It'd be a shame to lose it.
Absolutely. Another thing that occurred to me in terms of us being very fortunate, given the times and where we were from, is we had so much local support. And what I mean is, we had newspapers that would write articles about us. We were invited to be on radio shows up at the college. So we really had a lot of support, and a lot of that is documented. So you can look at it and think, if we had to pay for that or go through a publicist, that would have been very expensive. But people were interested in who we were and what we were doing musically, and were willing to write stories or publish pictures. So we were very lucky.
Well, we also had the Battle of the Bands that they had every year at the Copper Fox. You remember those? That was a really big deal in town. It was just a packed house every year that they had them. And I think the first year that we went on to play that, I think we actually won the Battle of the Bands. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that was another sort of enabling moment because, of course, part of the prize package for the whole thing, I guess, was to do a recording session for a demo tape.
That was actually our first gig, which happened on December 7th, 1989 at the Copper Fox, and it was part of the student music benefit. And you're right, that did eventually lead to the opportunity to record our first demo, which again, is now available on music streaming services. It's all been archived. So we kind of hit the ground running, locally speaking. I'm going to throw some dates at you guys, or venues, and just for fun, see if anything, if it triggers any memories for you. I'll start with you, Rob. April 5th, 1990, Vicious Angel live at the Dark Horse.
Well, live at the Dark Horse helps. I'm terrible with dates. But I remember playing the Dark Horse. The Dark Horse was one of the better venues in town. I said before, it's a college town, and most of the bars are kind of the basement bars that are just the long corridors. But the Dark Horse actually sort of had a stage, and it was set up a little bit better for people to see the band. And it was one of the more popular places in town to play. And I remember we played there, a bunch of times. Was that the first time?
That was the first time.
That was the first time? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That place actually burned down in, I think it was in 92.
February 29th, 1992.
Yeah, there we go. The other thing about the Dark Horse is it was actually right next door to the office where my mom worked. And the office burned. I mean, that was how I heard about it. I was at college when it happened, and my mom called me and said basically the office burned down, and then I found out the Dark Horse burned down next to it as well. Nobody was hurt.
Thank God.
But that office, I remember going to my mom's office, after school or whatever, to use the photocopier to make flyers for all of the Vicious Angel shows. So, I'm sure I made the flyer for that show and photocopied it on that photocopier right next door to the Dark Horse. That was one of the cooler places in Oneonta to play.
Tim, May 3rd, 1990, Vicious Angel at the Copper Fox, the music student benefit. We were the headliners.
We were the headliners?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I remember playing a couple of those music benefit concerts, so I can't be sure. Gosh, 30 years ago, and you want me to remember a specific show, huh?
Well, I'll give you a little hint. I have
Okay.
a friend, my friend Mike Chilston, was at that gig, and he always brings up the fact that we performed Stairway to Heaven and you played the flute. And for some reason that has left this indelible impression on his memory. He loves that memory. He loves our performance of that song and always mentions it every time I speak with him.
Yeah, that was that really was quite a popular thing. We also at one point, I think we played a Jethro Tull tune, and I can't, Locomotive Breath. Yeah, and that sort of draws together a couple of different points that we've already brought up, and trying to learn those things at that time, you had to you couldn't really get the music written out. You couldn't go to YouTube and find out how to play something. You had to just keep running the tape back. And for me, playing the flute, while that was, a fairly simple line, the Led Zeppelin tune, there's just something about the uniqueness of having a guy get up there and play the flute that I don't know if it's because it's shiny or what, but it shocks and surprises people, and they go, oh, gee, these guys aren't just rock musicians, and well, I think it calls out to a little more class as musicians, which, obviously you had studied classical guitar and piano as well. And Rob, you went on to Berkeley, if I'm not wrong about that.
Yeah.
There was a lot of real serious music targeting in the lives of all of us. And, I think that kind of shows it and sort of sets you apart because, well, nobody else had something like that. So,
Shane, I'm going to take you back to Saturday, April 14th, 1990. Vicious Angel performs at the Oasis.
I remember this one really well. Now, to set up where we played mostly in this town, Oneonta, most of these shows, including the theater and the clubs, were all in the downtown area. The Oasis was a hotel, lounge, and restaurant in a section of town called the West End, where I lived at the time. But the Oasis is really unique because although it's only a mile or two from where we typically played, it may as well have been on a different planet, because there, for the most part, you're not able to draw in your high school following because it's a lounge, and it was a topless lounge too. They had topless dancers on Friday and Saturday nights. It was also a Chinese restaurant and a pretty seedy hotel even back then. And you were not really going to draw your college following for the most part either, just because it's 2 miles removed. It wasn't within walking distance, pre-Uber and everything. So it just wasn't realistic. So what sticks out at me, although musically we were very diverse and drew upon our influences. So this is 1990. It's not like we were playing all 1990 in modern music. I mean, we went back to our roots, 70s, late 60s, music that was a classic at that time. But in a venue like this, you're talking about a pretty rough clientele. And I specifically remember playing a modern song at the time by a band called Slaughter, which would be more of that melodic, hair metal, for lack of a better term. And the audience, the few people that were there, were a little rowdy and were like, hey, play some Leonard Skinner. It was one of those situations where you could start to see potentially, beer bottles flying at you. But luckily, between a couple of Peter's fraternity guys and a couple of, contacts that knew us there, they were able to settle that down. But that was a situation that could have gotten out of hand, but that was a really unique show because it was just, like I said, so close to the core of where we played, but like I said, may as well have been on a different planet because it's just a completely different clientele. And I just wanted one more note. A year later, with version 2 of the band, we actually did the smart thing. Below the Oasis is a completely open room. Maybe they would use it for catering or banquets or whatnot. But what we did is Rob, Tim, and I, we rented out that basement and made it an all ages show and had a really big high school turnout. It was prior to our second theater show, but the place is packed. So that was the way to do it. We rented the sound system from Mountain Music and utilized the basement so we could have it all ages. But meanwhile, imagine there's an all ages show going on downstairs. There's this hotel with all this other seedy activity and topless dancers going on upstairs at the same time on a Saturday night.
Well, I think this was a great conversation, and we've touched upon some incredible memories. I will include links to some of the classic Vicious Angel footage below. And it was just amazing speaking with you guys today and seeing all of you and reflecting upon happier times.
Especially just a shout out to the COVID-19 business, to sort of, for posterity, fix this in time. Right now, as we speak, we're in the middle of this COVID-19 epidemic, and our hats, go off, and our hearts go out to everybody who's who's experiencing any kind of hardship from that. You know, when you say happier times, it really was the best times of our lives, and God forbid that we should really forget it.
Absolutely, and I concur. All right, gentlemen. Well, we will maybe have a follow-up episode at some point. It was great seeing all of you.
And thanks for putting this together.
Thanks for doing
Thank
this.
you. Great seeing you guys.
Talk to you guys soon.
You got
Thanks.
it.